there are things that can be done, but it's all downstream. It's all downstream of that big one thing, the restoration of character and decency and rigor in the Republican Party. You can work with a party that has character. It becomes impossible over the long term for a society to absorb the consequences of horrific character.
David, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me.
David, I feel like it's time to cue the Bing Crosby old Christmas classic, Do You Hear What I Hear? We had a panel has rejected President Trump's idea to shutter FEMA. We've got GOP lawmakers who don't like his plan about giving checks to Americans as payouts for the tariffs. Are these just a coincidental string of one-offs, or is the right rising up against their chosen leader?
Okay, so it's premature to say that. Absolutely premature to say that. But it is also true that Election Day got their attention. And I think it got the attention of Republicans in a very specific way, as they realized that, wait a minute, Donald Trump is not going to be on the ballot again. And we have, in history demonstrates, we tend to only do well in this MAGA era when Donald Trump is on the ballot. When he's not on the ballot, our MAGA candidates tend to crumble and fail. The blue, Democrat blue America tends to surge. And so they're staring at a reality where the party has changed in a way that is not popular with Americans, except when Trump's on the ballot. And even then it's not popular. It's just he can secure a plurality. So they've saddled themselves with a sort of a culture and ethos and agenda that is not all that popular on its own. And the guy who can carry it over the finish line isn't going to be running in another election. So I think some light bulbs are starting to turn on here. However, the reason why I say that it's really premature to say that everything is cracking apart, really, Trump is still the most powerful force in the GOP with the Republican primary voter. And the day I will call Donald Trump a lame duck is the day that I no longer think that he is the most powerful force with the Republican primary voter. And because that is the sword that hangs over the head of all of these guys. And so at least through 2026, I think we're going to have the party mostly enthralled to Trump, but with some firewall elements that haven't existed before. Because I think they realized they couldn't go to the people and say, yeah, we voted to keep the Epstein files hidden. Like that was going to be a bridge too far. Or knowing what $2,000 checks will do to inflation. We've seen this movie before in the very recent past when the giant flood of stimulus and COVID is one of the things that resulted in COVID era inflation. So I do think that it's way premature to say that there's a real dissenting movement, but it is not premature to say that the Republicans see the end of this era. They can see it coming, and you're beginning to see them respond accordingly.
Mike, Marjorie Taylor Greene recently told Politico that the 5-alarm fire is healthcare and affordability for Americans. She got on The View and she said she's still the same person, but is she? Who is she listening to right now?
Oh, man. I mean, what a giant question to deal with, right? I got to say, one of the most interesting sort of cultural moments of the last few weeks was actually her appearance on the Bill Maher show a couple of weeks ago, where she was sitting next to Michael Moynihan, who's, kind of a libertarian voice, journalist. And of course, obviously she's sitting next to Bill Maher. And she was, look, this is a person who has indulged in all kinds of conspiracy theories. She has operated as a profound troll to her colleagues in Congress. But you go watch that. I mean, I would encourage people, go watch that Bill Maher performance. Part of what's interesting, on the one hand, is how rational she is in all of the conversations that they have. The other part that's fascinating, and actually the more entertaining part, is watching Michael Moynihan and Bill Maher sort of slack-jawed going, wait, like, why is she not talking like a crazy person? Because this is what we're used to from her, right? Look, I think Marjorie Taylor Greene is she seems authentically concerned about her constituents, because every politician is, to the extent that like you can account for the motives in a variety of ways, but their careers are over if their constituents feel like you don't care about me and you're not invested in what I'm doing. So I think she's hearing from her people. She has a real sense of kind of where they are, and she's moving in a direction where she's less interested right now anyway in the performative stuff and more interested in delivering for them things that they are very concerned about.
What do you think, David? You talked about the sword hanging over the head, the voter. We know that there are significant risks to running up against Trump, to breaking rank.
Well, yeah, I think I should say there really, let me just say there are two swords now. So the sword number one is Trump in sort of the primary world. Like that, I think there's still a real sense that Trump is the kingmaker in Republican primaries. So that's one sword. But then now the other sword is the general election voter in the swing districts. And so you're seeing a lot of Republicans now realizing, if we live to fight we live through the primary, many of them are going to politically die during the general, right? And so they're in this very awkward position, in this very awkward moment. I'm actually a little bit surprised how impactful this off-year election was. It's as if I have seen just a very clear break between first Tuesday in November and post. That's almost as interesting as the pre-Tucker Carlson interviewing Nick Fuentes and post. And there are just these key events that occurred that it was just as if the scales fell from the eyes of a number of Republicans, and they just began to realize we're in trouble. We are in real trouble. Trump is underwater on almost everything. And his one area of success, of sort of, I'm not going to say clear success, but relative success in the Middle East, is not going to matter when grocery prices are high. It's not going to matter when you have masked people in streets yanking people out of their cars and creating the kinds of chaos we've seen in Chicago and now in Charlotte, North Carolina. People are always going to care more about what's happening here than what's happening overseas. And then also, if Trump continues to sell out Ukraine, as he's apparently doing, a collapse, a catastrophe in Ukraine would at least for a time break through even the domestic stranglehold on news. A true catastrophe in Ukraine, a true collapse, a true yielding or surrender to Russia. So there's a lot of things out there that are hovering for Republicans where they know that they're in a terrible position, just a terrible position, but Trump makes it all worse for them because they still can't clearly break with him consistently unless it's very limited areas, Epstein being one of them. And so it's a difficult, the Republican Party's in this very difficult transitional period. And then there's this weird other thing out there. We all know Donald Trump can't run for president in 2028. We also know that he makes noise like he can. And Jonathan Last had a really interesting point yesterday. He said, so long as Trump keeps making noise like that, it actually has an effect of sort of delaying the emergence of competitors, because we're about 9 months to a year out from when you'd really start to see that next generation of people coming forward and making all the leaks about who's going to run and all of this stuff. But so long as Trump sort of is casting himself as the once and future king, even though it's completely illegitimate, he's not. I have people ask me all the time, do you think Trump's going to run for a third term? No. Do you think Trump's going to have a third term? No, that is not something on my worry list at all. But I will say that him flirting with this openly, with him talking about this, him having the little caps that say Trump 2028, I do think all of this has a subtle effect of sort of delaying the emergence of that next generation. And I think that the who follows Trump is about as up in the air as any question can possibly be, because I do not believe that J.D. Vance is in the pole position there. I do not believe that. I think that it's completely up in the air who follows Trump.
And just to tie on to that, like the the thing about Donald Trump is he really is I mean, he really is an interesting historical figure. He's somebody who he has a certain, to borrow from the movie Taken, he's a man with a certain set of skills. They're very specific. And his particular set of skills is his ability to captivate and capture our imaginations, capture attention, just dominate the media landscape. I mean, it makes me think about John Mulaney has this bit where he talks about Donald Trump being president is like having a horse in a hospital.
Yes, I love that bit. Yeah.
Right? That's running loose.
So funny.
And it's like, there's a horse in the hospital. It's kind of amazing, but it's also kind of like, there's a horse in the hospital. It shouldn't be here. Like, and you can kind of, you kind of just see the wreckage that comes with a lot of this. I think what David said just now is really, really important. The reason Trump is flirting with this thing is not because he thinks he can do it, because I guarantee every lawyer that is in his orbit is telling him, dude, they will smack you down at the Supreme Court. That court will not let this happen. I have
no way.
Zero doubts that is the case. But to continue, as David said, to continue to flirt with it creates this situation where there's ambiguity, and it works for Trump, because then all eyes are on him. They're not looking for the successor. They're not looking for who comes next. They're not looking for how does the party evolve from where it is right now.
It is going to be so fascinating when people start announcing. And this is going to be an interesting dynamic, because the camera will move to the contenders. That you will start to see, for the first time in Trump's political life, he's not always going to be the main character. And it's going to be interesting to see how he reacts to that, because as president of the United States, you can always do things to make yourself the main character. You have that ability. The bully pulpit can be used in so many different ways. So it's going to be interesting to me to see if he sorts when this next generation sort of steps forward, whether it's Rubio trying again, or Cruz trying again, or J.D. Vance trying, or Donald Trump Jr., or Brian Kemp from Georgia. There will be some attention shift, and it's going to be fascinating to see how he responds to that. He does not strike me as the kind of person like, say, a George W. Bush, who's going to be content to sort of tail off in his sort of prominence and then recede back to his ranch and
paint.
Yeah. I don't think that's in the card. I'm going to go out. I don't like to be in the prediction business, but I'll predict that. That's not in the card.
Well, the Epstein story has shown us that he does have some drawing skills. So, anything's possible.
Well, there is that.
An October Gallup poll said that a record share, 43%, self-identify as political independents now, and that most of these were not true swing voters, The Atlantic said, but they hold both major parties in low regard. If lawmakers and politicians are sort of feeling around in the dark, trying to figure out what to do with their constituencies in the face of Donald Trump, the specter of Donald Trump, what do you do with all of these people who say, I don't even know who to like anymore?
Well, first thing you got to realize is that's not a consolidated block of people. It's going to include moderates, sort of middle of the road people, and it's also going to include a heck of a lot of extremists. People who are independent because the Republican Party is not conservative enough, or they're independent because the Democratic Party isn't left enough. And so that's why it's always interesting to kind of map out who are the right-leaning independents, who are the left-leaning independents. So this is not a block that one person can reach, because it contains a lot of incompatible constituencies. What it does show is widespread discontent with the two parties. It does not show a unified alternative ideological vision, which is one of the problems that we have in this country. Is there's enormous discontent with politics right now, just enormous, but there is absolutely no consensus on what it should be replaced by. And it's why, when you talk about this exhausted majority, that's 2/3 of America, and they share these common characteristics, and we don't feel like we're listened to, and we don't feel like there's compromise. And a lot of people will say, yeah, that's 100% me. And then the first thing that you try to do, if you try to mobilize that 2/3, you go, okay, we all want more compromise. We all want more conversation, and we want lower taxes. Well, then all of a sudden you lose half your group. Or you need higher taxes on the rich. You're going to lose half your group. Or we need to support Israel. You're going to lose. I mean, so there's not a shared ideological vision amongst a lot of these independents, but there's absolutely a shared sort of disgust and revulsion. And it's just very hard to do anything with that politically in a productive way because there's no shared ideological vision.
To David's point, and I think this really matters. Part of what we're seeing with this is that what polarization has done is it's put the parties in a position where neither one can be a majority party. It's driven everything to these edges that are where the absurd, the ridiculous, that's the thing that wins you your primary and loses your general. And it's happened over and over and over and over again. Trump is the only one who's been able to kind of keep afloat on top of that, while pushing for while pushing to these edges. I don't know what it would take. I mean, Jonah Goldberg over at the Dispatch, he talks about this all the time, and he says, the thing we've got to do is we've got to reform our primary system so that in his phrasing, he says, bring back the smoke-filled room, because what comes out of the smoke-filled room is people who are more concerned with winning than they are with sort of weird ideological purity. If there was a smoke-filled room, Zohran Mamdani would not be the mayor of New York right now. Mm-hmm. If there was a smoke-filled room, you wouldn't have some of these really fringy and strange candidates on both ends of the spectrum. So I'm not sure how that happens. I'm not sure if there's a mechanism for making that happen. But until the parties get genuinely concerned with, hey, we want to be a majority party, we want to appeal to the largest number of people possible, rather than we need to win this primary where we can take a fringe candidate and push them over the edge. I don't know how we get there.
Whether or not there is a major shift coming in the Republican Party, David, certainly the government shutdown has exposed, at least for Marjorie Taylor Greene and some others, that exhausted majority that you talked about. And, here on the show, we have talked a lot since the election about what the Democrats need to do to get a new game plan in the face of Trump. But I'm curious, as we close, if you could have a magic wand and you could rebuild the Republican Party, what three things would you wish for?
I will tell you, I've got one thing and everything's downstream from that one thing. So the one thing is the restoration of character and decency in the Republican Party. And why do I say that's the one thing that everything's downstream from that? A lot of the Republican Party's ideological problems, a lot of the Republican Party's problems with conspiracy, et cetera, are all downstream of this total abandonment of character. And so you have people who are absolute charlatans ideologically. You have people who are conspiracy-minded, unhinged and conspiracy-minded. All of these things are things that come out of a rejection of the idea of rectitude, restraint, honesty, all of these things. When you shed honesty, when you shed restraint, when you shed prudence, when you shed compassion, when you shed empathy, it's like lifting the lid on chaos. And when you restore compassion, when you restore empathy, when you restore honesty, when you restore intellectual rigor, then you automatically cut out a lot of crap. It just goes away. And now I would have an ideological vision after that that's a modified form of Reaganism. I don't think Reaganism, you can't take 1980 Reaganism and transplant it into 2025, right? But I do think the overall principles regarding, hey, limited government, at the very least, let's ask some hard questions before we launch into massive government programs, or let's take a real look at how government is actually impeding economic growth. That this is something that, on the left side of the spectrum, my colleague Ezra Klein is doing really well with his Abundance book, is how is government hurting us? Double down on international alliances and relationships. Realize that we have had 80 years without a great power war and without the millions of deaths that would result because of these relationships. Let's not take them for granted. Let's maintain peace and stability in the world. Is there room for more populist style policies for a working class coalition? I think so. I do think so. I'm not going to say that everything has to be doctrinaire, sort of quasi-libertarian economic politics. There's going to be room for compromise. There's going to be, and should the Republican Party maybe pay more attention to the social safety net than it has in the past? Yeah, I think so. So there are things that can be done, but it's all downstream. It's all downstream of that big one thing, the restoration of character and decency and rigor in the Republican Party. You can work with a party that has character. It becomes impossible over the long term for a society to absorb the consequences of horrific character. And so that, my colleague Jonah Goldberg, we've quoted him a lot today. He has always said character is destiny. I think those are true words. So I'm going to cheat and say one thing and many things after that, but none of it will work without the one thing.
Well, thanks for this conversation, Mike and David. Listeners, stay informed, think deeply, and grow in your faith. Start a new Christianity Today subscription before December 1st and save 50% during our lowest price of the year. Visit orderct.com/lowest price to learn more. Listen to the full episode wherever podcasts are found.